Hey everybody, this is PolitiPeeps. I'm Siobhan Lynch, also known as Trish. We're here today with Mathias Nordvig and Heather Larson, and we're going to talk a little bit about heavy metal and as it relates to libertarianism. And we have a really good sort of breadth of experience with metal, I think, here. So let me let you guys introduce yourselves first and what you want your experience with metal and libertarianism, and we'll have a little discussion here.
I'm Mathias Nordvig, visiting assistant professor at the University of Colorado in Boulder, and I work with various aspects of how, for instance, the use of the Viking Age and Nordic mythology crossover with heavy metal, and I have also been a metalhead since, well, I could walk pretty much, and my genres are mostly black metal and death metal, and that's what I will be contributing about.
My own experience with metal, I've been a metalhead since I was 14, and I'm 47 now, so that means, let's do the math, 33 years. I got into metal in junior high through Judas Priest and Iron Maiden, and I still love them a lot today. So kind of that British, heavy metal from, it started in the 70s and 80s. And then as I got older, I started liking things like thrash metal. Got into thrash metal a lot with Metallica and Megadeth, and then I moved on to death metal, and grindcore and hardcore, and so I also like brutal death metal a lot. So through that, I kind of got into slamming brutal death metal. So that's quite the most extreme genre that there is out there. So that's kind of my background in metal.
So I started out, very much like Heather. I was young. God, must have been about 10 maybe, and I'm 45 now. And it started out with Iron Maiden and Judas Priest, actually, for me. And after that, it was, I was obsessive about listening to Maiden and Priest. I mean, and several other bands kind of came along. And one of them was Metallica, and another was Anthrax, and those kind of changed everything for me. They were just so heavy. And it was, but not only that, but especially Metallica was very melodic. And I sort of tied into that, and, Metallica in many ways sort of led to my other musical loves, including progressive rock. Because Metallica was very progressive in terms of music structure and everything else. And so, from there, by the time I was in late high school, I was playing in Rush cover bands and, playing Yes and Genesis and things like that. So it sort of, metal was the basis for pretty much everything that I loved in music at that time. And even now, I always sort of go back to that. It's what I go back to when I, need that sort of release of, it's almost a tension release for me when it comes to metal. It's expressive. It's a lot more expressive than many other types of music for me personally. So
yeah, same here. I mean, it's always been my go-to. Like, when times are tough or I'm feeling down, I mean, metal just brings me back up. You feel like you can let out a lot of frustration and anger and stuff when you listen to some of the heaviest stuff that is out there.
I listen to heavy metal when I work.
Me too.
No, seriously, I do too. It's actually really interesting because I've gotten into this metal. So there's a guy named Clayton who does like this electronica metal. He does it he's got a bunch of different projects, which happens in the metal community where like, one guy will work on like a bunch of stuff, but like he'll name it different things because they're slightly different styles. And the band is Cell Dweller, and like I'll spend the entire day just listening to all this like electronica metal that's like futuristic sounding. It's incredible.
That does sound interesting, yeah. Yeah, no. So for me, it's heavy metal is something that, as I said, I've always listened to. I think I started around when I was 5, thanks to family members, and so for instance, for me personally, in doing my studies on the Viking Age and Nordic mythology and all of that stuff, especially Norwegian black metal has sort of been part of the inspiration and part of that intellectual background that has fueled my interests and also a lot of inspiration and creativity as a researcher. I mean, I think it says a lot that I ended up writing a PhD with like about Vikings and volcanoes, basically. So there you have the two very explosive elements of a lot of heavy metal themes too. So, but actually, what I was just thinking, and of course, it's for me. There's definitely also an aspect of a sort of some kind of emotional release when you listen to heavy metal. But I find it interesting to see lately that there's been several studies about first of all sort of where do we find heavy metal fans in the general demographic, and also what does heavy metal actually do to people's emotional states. And one of the things that I've seen come out lately is a study on that basically says that heavy metal fans seem to be able to deal with their emotions more efficiently than others. And this is I was watching Edward's interview with Larry Sharp on happiness, and that just sort of connected for me that oh, wait a minute, there's actually some happiness to be gained from listening to a type of music that's otherwise extremely violent in its aesthetics and also lyrics in many ways. Mm-hmm. So that's one interesting thing. And another thing that you can also see in some of the studies on the demography of heavy metal is that back in the 80s, there was a general worry that the heavy metal fans would turn out to be social delinquents and such. But it generally looks like heavy metal fans have become nice, responsible adults who go to work and have sort of normal middle-class families in so many ways. So those are things to consider too when we talk about heavy metal, that there's heavy metal could sort of be a way of actually enhancing your personal happiness, and also through those things. And now I'm theorizing, of course, but through such things as enhancing your personal happiness by tapping into emotions through heavy metal, thereby also becoming a person who's better capable of taking care of your personal life situation in general. And I just think that's actually a really interesting and important point to consider.
It's funny because when I was a kid, all of us metalheads, we had the image of burnouts in school. And it's very interesting because, like we did do a lot of experimentation as kids with, alcohol, drugs, things like that. In some ways, metal glorified some of those things. But at the same time, I feel like most of us got those experimentations out of our system early. So we were able to sort of move on and become more productive, happier, whatever, because we got that experimentation out of the way, and we knew how to express emotions, such as, there was anger, but there was sadness, there was a lot of, take the Metallica song Fade to Black, for instance. It was one of those songs that, like, we all listened to when, like, the shit was coming down. And it made a huge difference to be able to sort of express yourself in that way. And, by the time I think we all got to adulthood, we had learned actual healthy ways of expressing emotions that maybe other people didn't get. And we had gotten, like I said, all that experimentation, all we also saw ourselves as in some ways more free, getting into the libertarian aspect. We were separate from the establishment. You know, and this is back in the 80s and 90s, but, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know when I was going to school, that was what, you know, metal was all about. It was for people who felt like they didn't belong anywhere else. And I think libertarians feel that way a lot, you know, so you've got that commonality. And then, of course, there's always that idea of going, you know, anti-authority and going against the status quo. That's always been something that's been, you know, relevant for metalheads and why we gravitate towards metal. And I think that same thing is true with libertarians. I know growing up listening to metal also appealed to my logical side. So for me, it just kind of helped me move into better decision making, I think, when I got older, as odd as that may sound. And you know, I did read that article too about, or the study where they talked about how metalheads tend to mature into more well-adjusted people. Mm-hmm. So, and I can totally agree with that. And you know, I do have a point to make though about the whole experimentation thing. It's like some of us still do things, but we know when and where the proper time to do it. It's like we still can manage our lives and things that we need to do.
Yeah, that's interesting because such things as drugs when I was growing up, but I of course also grew up in another cultural environment in Scandinavia, but they were more connected with sort of the techno scene and
mm-hmm.
You know, reggae and hip hop. I feel like that's where you would more see people experimenting with those kinds of things, and I feel like in a sense for us who were into the heavy metal, we didn't really care too much about those things. I mean, I never really have much. And even today, I don't even drink alcohol. So, you know, and my only drug is nicotine at this point, and caffeine. but heavy metal in Scandinavia, of course, had the same sort of foundation of being an outsider in the larger society and cultural community. But Scandinavians probably have also related to heavy metal a little differently than we see, sort of like, for instance, in the 80s and early 90s, we have the satanic panic here in mm-hmm. the US, and people being scared of like the connection between heavy metal and witchcraft and dark rituals and ultimately crime of various kinds. That was not so much the case in Scandinavia, and I say this with a big but, because there's going to be more to that. So what you see, for instance, is that parents they don't seem to tend to think, oh, this is a problem that my kid is into heavy metal. And here comes the but in this. Of course, we have the black metal scene in the early 90s that burns down churches and does actually kill people too. Mm-hmm. And that would sort of be the exception, again, because what we see is that that's a small part of the black metal community, certain individuals who are involved with that. And of course, the Norwegian press back in the day, they treat this phenomenon the same way as we see the American media treating the satanic panic and so on. But it's generally on a smaller scale, and what we have seen now in, for instance, places like Norway, is that heavy metal has sort of stepped into the heart of the cultural epicenter. A band like an old black metal band like Satyricon has played at the opera in Oslo.
Oh yeah,
and I love Satyricon.
Yeah, and I was just at the Midgardsblot festival in Borre in Norway, where that takes place at these historical grounds of the Borre Mounds, which has a little museum and cultural center attached to it. And so what and they have immense backup from the local municipality, and it tends to be now that these heavy metal events and heavy metal bands in Scandinavia are seen more as a resource and as part of established society. But still, you know, but still, it's also an outsider phenomenon at the same time, because I did an interview with one of the organizers of Midgårdsblot, and we of course had to also talk about, you know, this aspect of like, just because somebody likes, for instance, music that has a satanic message does not mean that they're interested in Satanism.
Right. Well, it's sort of like me and King Diamond, right? Like King Diamond was huge for me. Just, I mean, primarily because of the music style itself. And then the concept albums and things like that, which I loved. I loved the stories and everything else. But, you know, it was funny because I used to troll my mom by wearing a King Diamond shirt to church when I was a kid, you know, but like that was, you know, I mean, King Diamond was an avowed Satanist, you know, and
yes,
I wasn't interested at all in that. I was just interested, wow, these stories are really, really creepy and really cool. Like, you know, and then the guitar, Andy LaRocque was just an amazing guitarist. Like you could not listen to this and be like, you know, I mean, they were just extremely skilled musicians.
Yeah.
So.
You know, I work at a university, and I just have to tell you something real quick about the avowed Satanist thing. It's just kind of funny because I ran across a kid once who had was wearing an upside down cross. And so I asked him, I said, "Are you a Satanist?" He goes, "No, I just like pissing people off." So I thought that was just kind of an interesting.
And see, that's the interesting thing, right? Because now we get into some of these core aspects, I would say, of a libertarian way of thinking. Because, I mean, what this really signals then is a need, a desire among these individuals who latch on to music like that and wears a inverted cross, to define themselves in the way that they decide, right? So to basically take power and freedom over their own life situation. And of course, when you're younger, a lot of that is a matter of, you know, your immediate appearance, how you come off to people, and you know, what symbols you wear, and what kind of music you listen to. And I think that's part of the core of sort of heavy metal culture in a broader sense. If we think about what type of peoples have traditionally been listening to heavy metal, we see through the late 70s and 80s and 90s, it's generally the white middle class and males primarily, and there just seems to be some aspect of wanting to step out of these otherwise conform roles, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was very much a sense of, I think when I was a kid and very into metal, there was a huge sense of rebellion for me. You know, anti-establishment, didn't want to be what everybody wanted me to be. So here I was, and I was going to, you know, and there was something about metal itself that just sung to me. So that's going to lead us off probably into our next, what we're going to have next for you guys. This is Politipeeps. I'm Siobhan Lynch. Please like, subscribe, or ring the bell to be notified. And please leave a comment on the YouTube video. And Mathias, Heather, how do we find you guys?
You can find me through my webpage, NordicMythologyChannel.com. You can also find me by Googling my name, Mathias Nordvig, on Google, of course, and also find my YouTube channel on YouTube by, again, searching for the same, either my name or the Nordic Mythology Channel.
Heather?
I do have a website. It's HALarsonauthor.com. I am on Facebook as H.A. Larson, and you can also find me on Instagram.
Thank you very much. We'll see you guys soon.